Nobody warned me how lonely nights could be without him. Hello, my name is Emily. I am 28 years old. A few months ago, I moved in with my boyfriend, James. Back then, I was naive about living together. I imagined romantic movie scenes, laughing couples sharing happy moments. But reality turned out to be far more complicated. James and I settled into a small wooden cottage on the outskirts of Whitby, a quiet coastal town in Yorkshire. Our home was surrounded by dense oak woods and a stillness so deep it almost felt tangible. At first, that silence seemed magical, but soon I realized it carried with it a heavy loneliness. James had taken a night shift as a security guard at a local manufacturing plant downtown. He said it was temporary, just until we saved enough for something bigger, a car or that long-awaited holiday on the Cornish coast. I understood his reasoning, but the nights without him were brutal. Every hour dragged on endlessly, and I was left alone, unsure of what to do with myself. In our garden lived another presence. Max, James's young boxer dog. From day one, Max tried to win my heart with his big, soulful eyes and clumsy paws. James always said Max was a loyal friend who would never betray me, but I resisted the idea of letting a dog inside the house. Maybe it was old habits or silly prejudices, like dogs belonged outside, not inside our personal space. So every night I sat alone in the living room, listening to leaves rustling outside and crickets singing somewhere distant. I'm afraid of the dark, I admit that. Always have been. Now with James gone to work and Max left outside, my fear only grew stronger. My heart jumped at every suspicious sound, even though I knew it was just the wind or Max sniffing around. One chilly evening, wrapped in a warm blanket with a cup of tea, I heard a soft scratching at the door. Max was gently pawing, as if asking to come inside. Frozen between irritation and curiosity, I hesitated. Could he be cold? Was something wrong? Reluctantly, I stood and opened the door. Max immediately stepped inside, shook himself off, and looked up at me with those huge brown eyes as if saying, "Please, just tonight." I sighed and let him stay. He settled on the rug by the sofa, rolling onto his back to show his fluffy belly. "You're unbearable," I muttered, but a smile escaped me. That night, Max slept inside for the first time, and his presence seemed to dissolve the oppressive silence that had felt suffocating before. He was quiet, breathing calmly, and that rhythm soothed me. Since then, I noticed how his quiet company helped me bear the loneliness. Max became my little comfort, not a replacement for James but real company. For the first time in a long while, I felt less alone. Lying in my bedroom, I called to him softly, "Max, come here." He responded immediately, wagging his tail happily and resting at my feet. Looking at him, I thought maybe I'd resisted too long. At this moment, I knew he had become part of my world. I had no idea that this night would mark the start of something new. Something that would change my life more than I could have imagined. Life with James and Max began to take on new shapes, though I still struggled with his night shifts and the emptiness left behind when he left. On mornings when he prepared for work, I watched him put on his dark navy security jacket, heavy boots that looked bulky on his slim legs. His usually calm, confident face looked tired and tense, as if bracing for a long battle against the night's darkness and the factory's loneliness. We didn't say much, just exchanged quick glances and faint smiles, our quiet support for each other. When the door clicked shut behind him, I was left alone in our little house, surrounded by silence and shadows cast by the evening dusk. Max, sensing my mood, now came inside more often without waiting for permission. He walked confidently on the wooden floors as if it were his castle. I still resisted at times but gradually softened. Sometimes he'd bring an old rubber toy, a half-chewed ball he treated like treasure. He'd wag his tail and look at me as if begging to play. "Want me to throw it for you?" I'd ask, and he'd bark happily in reply. In those moments, I laughed genuinely for the first time in ages. His childlike joy and carefree spirit seeped into my heart, making me forget my worries and fears. But Max was stubborn. James once bought him a simple dark blue jacket to protect him from cold nights. James insisted Max loved it and was always happy to wear it. I saw something different. The moment James left for work, Max began a battle with that jacket. He'd roll on the floor, rub against furniture, and claw at the fabric as if it were a cursed cage. I couldn't help but smile watching his desperate attempts to shed the uncomfortable outfit. At first, I just watched from a distance, unsure how to help, but then I realized I shouldn't make him suffer. Gently, I picked Max up, held him close, and removed the jacket. His joy was boundless. He immediately came alive, barking, running around the room, rubbing his face against my legs as if to say, "Thank you." That small moment marked the beginning of a special trust between us. I understood that true closeness is born not from big words or promises, but from simple acts of care and understanding. Now, when James left for work, I no longer felt completely alone. Max was my companion during those long hours. He wasn't just a dog. He was my friend, my comfort in the night's silence, my support. And despite all the changes and challenges, I realized this was only the beginning. Many more trials and surprises awaited us, ready to reshape our lives forever. The mornings in our little cottage became a quiet ritual, the calm before the storm that was James's night shift. I would watch him as he dressed in his security uniform, a dark navy jacket with the company emblem stitched on the chest and heavy boots that looked almost too big for his slender feet. His face, usually so composed and confident, held a subtle weariness in those moments, as if bracing himself for the long, lonely hours ahead. We rarely spoke at length during those mornings, just exchanged brief, knowing glances and faint smiles, a silent reassurance that we were in this together. Once the door clicked shut behind him, the house seemed to grow larger, emptier. Shadows stretched across the wooden floors, and the silence pressed in on me. Max, sensing my unease, began slipping inside without waiting for permission. He moved around with quiet confidence, as if claiming the cottage as his own domain. I tried to resist the change. Old habits die hard, but slowly I found myself softening. There was something about his presence that began to fill the spaces I hadn't realized were empty. Max had his own quirks that made me smile during those long days. He loved to bring me his half-chewed rubber ball, a battered little relic from his puppy days, as if offering me a piece of his joy. His tail wagged furiously, eyes shining with anticipation, silently begging me to throw it for him. "Want me to throw it for you?" I'd ask, and he'd bark excitedly in response. In those moments, laughter bubbled up inside me, real laughter, the kind I hadn't felt in a long time. His carefree spirit chipped away at my worries and fears, if only for a little while. But Max was also stubborn. James had bought him a dark blue jacket to keep him warm during the chilly Yorkshire nights, insisting that Max loved wearing it. Yet, the moment James left for work, Max waged a hilarious battle against the jacket. He'd roll on the floor, rub himself against furniture, and claw at the fabric as if trying to escape an invisible trap. Watching his frustrated antics made me smile despite myself. At first, I just observed, unsure whether to intervene, but eventually I realized I couldn't stand seeing him so uncomfortable. Carefully, I scooped Max into my arms, holding him close as I slipped the jacket off. His joy was immediate and contagious. He sprang to life, barking happily, running circles around the room, and rubbing his head against my legs in gratitude. It was a small moment, but it forged a new bond between us. I realized then that true closeness isn't built on grand gestures or promises, but on simple acts of kindness and understanding. With Max by my side during those long nights, the loneliness didn't feel quite so overwhelming. He wasn't just a dog anymore. He was my companion, my comfort, my shield against the silence. And even as I struggled to adjust to James's night shifts and the emptiness they left behind, I knew deep down that this was just the beginning. Ahead lay challenges and surprises that would test us in ways I couldn't yet imagine. But for the first time in a long while, I was ready to face them. Not alone, but with Max and James by my side. The days leading up to that night were a strange blend of quiet routines and growing unease. I tried to convince myself that everything was normal, that James's night shifts were just a phase, that Max's company was enough to fill the silence. But beneath the surface, a subtle tension was building. Like the calm before a storm no one could see coming. James worked hard, but the night shifts drained him. He would come home exhausted, his uniform wrinkled and his eyes heavy. Sometimes I caught glimpses of frustration flicker across his face, moments when he seemed weighed down by something invisible. He never spoke much about his work, only saying it was just a job, and that things would improve once we saved enough. I wanted to believe him, but the uncertainty gnawed at me. Max, ever perceptive, seemed to sense the tension as well. His behavior shifted subtly, He became more alert, pacing near the windows, ears pricked toward every sound outside. One evening, I noticed him quietly whining by the front door, his big brown eyes fixed on the darkness beyond. At first I thought he missed James, but then I realized something else was troubling him, something deeper and harder to understand. That night, wrapped in a soft blanket with a cup of tea warming my hands, I sat alone in the living room. The silence pressed against me again, heavier than before. Then came the scratching at the door, the soft, persistent sound that made my heart skip a beat. Max pawed gently, his eyes pleading as if asking for shelter from the cold night. I hesitated, torn between irritation, why now, and concern. Was he truly cold? Or was there something else? Slowly, I opened the door and Max stepped inside, shaking off the chill and settling at my feet. His calm breathing was a balm to my frayed nerves. For the first time, I felt a flicker of warmth against the loneliness that had wrapped itself around me. From that night on, Max's presence inside the house became a small but vital comfort. He was no longer just James's dog or a stubborn obstacle. I began to see him as my companion, a silent guardian against the creeping shadows of solitude. His soft fur beneath my fingers, the steady rhythm of his breathing, became anchors in the long dark hours when James was away. Yet, despite this newfound bond, a quiet unease lingered in the corners of the house. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us, waiting in the shadows beyond the oak trees that surrounded our cottage. The peaceful facade was fragile, and I sensed that the coming days would demand more courage than I thought I had. But for now, I clung to the simple moments, the warmth of Max's body curled beside me, the faint glow of the street lamp outside our window, and the hopeful thought that, somehow, we would find our way through the darkness together. Little did I know, the night was only the beginning of a story that would change everything we believed about safety, trust, and love. That night, the house felt colder than usual, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. James had left for his shift hours ago, the familiar click of the front door echoing in the empty rooms. I wrapped myself tightly in a knitted blanket, settling into the worn armchair by the fireplace, with Max lying faithfully by my feet. His presence was a comfort, but the silence was heavy, pressing down on me like a weight I couldn't shake. The wind whispered through the cracks in the wooden walls, rustling the oak leaves outside and carrying faint echoes of the distant town. Every creak and groan of the old cottage made my heart beat faster. I tried to focus on the book in my hands, but my eyes kept drifting toward the window, where shadows danced in the dim light of the street lamp. Suddenly a soft, almost imperceptible noise caught my attention, a faint scraping sound coming from the back door. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. Max's ears perked up instantly, and he let out a low warning growl. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. I told myself it was probably just the wind or a stray animal, but the unease settled deeper in my chest. Slowly, I rose and approached the window, peering into the darkness. The garden was empty, bathed in silver moonlight, but there was something unsettling about the stillness. Max shifted, his growl growing more insistent. I reached for the door handle, hesitating before pulling it open a crack. No one was there. Instead, on the doorstep lay a small folded piece of paper. My fingers trembled as I picked it up and unfolded it. Scrawled hastily in uneven letters was a single word: leave. My heart slammed against my ribs. I glanced down at Max, whose eyes were sharp and alert, his growl now a low rumble. The message was clear and chilling. Someone was watching us. Someone who knew we were alone. I slammed the door shut, bolted it, and stood there trembling. The walls seemed to close in, the cottage no longer a refuge but a trap. I looked back at Max and whispered, "What do we do now?" His eyes met mine, steady and unwavering, as if answering without words. "We stand together." That night sleep was impossible. Max stayed close, his body pressed against my side as the shadows deepened around us. Every sound outside made me jump. Every flicker of movement behind the curtains filled me with dread. I replayed the note over and over in my mind, trying to understand who it was from and why. Was this connected to James's work? Or maybe some forgotten chapter of our past that had come back to haunt us? The questions burned like fire, but there were no answers. Only the heavy silence and the weight of the unknown pressing down on us. As dawn finally broke, casting pale light through the windows, James returned home. His tired eyes instantly caught the tension in the room. I handed him the note, watching as his face drained of color. Without a word, he pulled out his phone and began making calls, his voice low but urgent. For the first time, I realized this wasn't just about loneliness or long nights anymore. We were in the middle of something far more dangerous, a game with stakes I hadn't imagined. And in that moment, with Max by my side and James fighting to protect us, I knew our lives were about to change forever. The hours that followed were a blur of whispered calls and hurried plans. James paced the small living room, phone pressed to his ear as he spoke with colleagues, trying to piece together who might have sent the threatening note. His usual calm demeanor was replaced by a tense urgency that made my stomach twist. Max sat alert beside me, ears twitching at every sound, as if sensing the gravity of the situation. We agreed to tighten security around the cottage. James secured every window and door with extra locks, even barricaded the back door with a heavy wooden beam. He set up a few old security cameras he had stashed away, their blinking red lights casting eerie glows in the dim room. The cozy home suddenly felt more like a fortress, a place under siege. Despite the precautions, the atmosphere was thick with unease. Every creak in the floorboards, every rustle outside sent my heart racing. I found myself jumping at the smallest sound, clutching Max's soft fur for comfort. His steady breathing was the only thing grounding me in the growing darkness. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and shadows lengthened, James prepared to leave for his night shift once more. I watched him don his security jacket, the weight of the uniform now carrying a new, heavier meaning. His tired eyes met mine, silently promising he would keep us safe. "Be careful," I whispered, my voice barely audible. He nodded, giving my hand a reassuring squeeze before stepping outside into the gathering dusk. Alone again, the silence returned, but it was no longer peaceful. Every minute stretched endlessly, filled with a growing sense of dread. I tried to keep busy, tidying the kitchen, reading a book, but my thoughts kept drifting back to the note, to the shadow lurking just beyond our doorstep. Max seemed restless too. He paced near the door, ears perked, eyes scanning the darkened windows. At one point he brought me the worn rubber ball, his way of asking for a moment of distraction. I threw it across the room, and for a brief moment laughter returned. But the shadow of fear remained, lurking beneath the surface. Around midnight, a sudden noise shattered the fragile calm. A sharp knock at the front door. My heart leapt into my throat. Max growled low and deep, standing protectively between me and the door. I hesitated, fear rooting me to the spot. Then the knock came again, more insistent this time. Summoning every ounce of courage, I moved toward the door and peered through the peephole. Outside stood a man in a dark coat, his face obscured by the hood. He said nothing, only extended a sealed envelope toward me before turning and disappearing into the night. Hands trembling, I retrieved the envelope. Inside was a photograph, a close-up shot of our cottage, taken from just beyond the garden. On the back, written in the same hurried scrawl as before, were the words, "We're watching." A chill ran down my spine. This was no longer a simple threat. This was a warning. Someone was stalking us, invading our sanctuary with sinister intent. Max's growl deepened, and I felt a surge of protectiveness rise within me. We were no longer just tenants of this quiet cottage. We were under siege. And I knew then that whatever lay ahead, we had to face it together. James would fight to protect us, but I realized that I couldn't hide behind his strength alone. I needed to find my own courage, to stand firm, to face the darkness that was closing in. The night stretched on, heavy with threat and uncertainty, and I clung to Max's warmth, steeling myself for the battles yet to come. I couldn't believe how fast everything spiraled into a nightmare I never saw coming. Just weeks before, I was struggling to get used to James's night shifts, and the heavy silence that settled over our cottage. Now, with those threatening notes and the shadowy figure lurking outside, my world had turned upside down. I kept replaying every moment in my mind, wondering how things might have been different, how we could have stopped this before it started. Sitting there in the dim light, Max curled tightly beside me, I realized how vulnerable we had been. I thought the worst loneliness I would face was the absence of James during his shifts, but this was a darkness I couldn't have imagined. It wasn't just the silence or the empty rooms. It was the feeling that someone was watching our every move, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. I thought about the note left on our doorstep, the single chilling word, leave. That simple message held so much power. It was a threat, a warning, and a demand all at once. But who was behind it? Was it connected to James's job at the factory? Had someone from his past come back with a grudge? Or was it something even more sinister, someone who wanted to tear us apart? My mind raced through possibilities, but none offered comfort. I thought about the times I'd sat alone, listening to the wind and the rustling leaves, trying to ignore the creeping feeling of unease. What if I had been braver, more alert? Could I have noticed the signs earlier? Or was this something we were destined to face no matter what? Max's quiet presence was my anchor. His calm breathing and steady heartbeat reminded me that I wasn't alone. He wasn't just a dog anymore. He was my protector, my companion in this fight. I stroked his soft fur and whispered, "We'll get through this, Max, together." I also thought about James, how tired he looked when he left for work, how determined he was to keep us safe. I admired his strength, but I knew he couldn't fight this battle alone. I had to find my own courage to stand beside him, not just as a girlfriend but as an equal partner in this fight for our home and our lives. Could we have asked for help sooner? Should we have told the neighbors or contacted the police when the first note appeared? Fear had kept me silent, and now that silence felt like a mistake. But it wasn't too late. We still had time to act, to protect ourselves, and to uncover the truth behind these threats. I thought about the small acts that had brought us closer. Max's defiant fight against his jacket. The way he quietly settled by my side during those lonely nights. Those moments had taught me that trust and love weren't just words. They were shields we could wield against the darkness. As I sat in the quiet room, the weight of the situation pressing down on me, I realized that this was just the beginning. The threats, the shadows, the fear. They were all part of a larger story unfolding around us. And I was determined to see it through. Together with James and Max, I would face whatever came next. But deep down, I knew that the next chapter held surprises I wasn't ready for. Twists that would shake the very foundation of everything I believed in. And yet, despite the fear, a small flame of hope flickered inside me. Because sometimes, it's in the darkest nights that we find our brightest strength. Just when I thought I had a grasp on the nightmare unfolding around us, everything took a sudden, terrifying turn. It started with a strange feeling. An uneasy chill that crept beneath my skin and refused to leave. Max was on edge too, his ears twitching at sounds I couldn't hear, his body tense and alert. Something was wrong, something far worse than the notes or the shadowy figure outside. One late evening, as the house settled into the usual quiet hum, there was a sharp, sinister knock at the door. My heart pounded in my chest as I approached, every nerve screaming at me to stay back. Max growled low, his protective stance unwavering. I peered through the peephole and saw no one, just the empty porch bathed in the weak glow of the porch light. Then, almost immediately, my phone buzzed with a message. I grabbed it with trembling hands. The screen showed a text from an unknown number. "You think you're safe? Think again." My breath caught. The message was chilling, but what came next shattered everything. Suddenly, the power in the cottage flickered and went out, plunging us into pitch-black darkness. Max barked sharply, his nails scrabbling across the wooden floor as he surged toward the door, but it was locked tight. My mind raced. Was this some kind of warning? An escalation? I felt trapped, vulnerable, and terrified. Then the phone rang. It was James. "Emily, stay calm." His voice was tense but steady. "Something's happening at the plant. I don't know what, but I'm on my way back." I clung to the phone as the seconds stretched endlessly. The house felt suffocating without light, every shadow a threat. Max stayed close, panting softly but alert. I whispered reassurances to him, trying to keep myself together. Minutes later, just as I was beginning to feel completely helpless, a sudden noise came from the back window. A faint scraping, like something or someone trying to get in. My heart stopped. I moved toward the window, gripping the edge of the sill, and for a moment, I thought I saw a shadow dart away into the night. It wasn't just a threat anymore. Whoever was behind this was closer than I had dared imagine. Watching us, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And the worst part? I had no idea why. What had James done or not done that brought this darkness to our doorstep? The line to James went dead. My fingers trembled as I tried calling back, but there was no signal. The isolation closed in around me like a vice. I was alone, trapped in a house that suddenly felt like a cage. Max whined softly, pressing against my legs, and I realized that I was no longer just scared for myself. I was terrified for James, for the life we were building, and for the fragile peace we had fought so hard to find. That night shattered everything I thought I knew. The enemy wasn't invisible anymore. It was close, personal, and determined, and I had no idea if we would survive what was coming next. The seconds stretched into an eternity as I stood frozen by the window, the darkness swallowing the faint glow of the street lamp outside. Max's low growl vibrated through the room, a warning that sent shivers down my spine. The shadow I had glimpsed earlier wasn't just a trick of the light. It was real, and it was lurking just beyond the glass. My breath caught in my throat, heart hammering like a drum. I gripped the windowsill tighter, trying to steady my racing thoughts. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to lock every door and hide, but something deeper, a stubborn resolve, held me in place. I wasn't going to let fear win. Not now. Suddenly, a faint tapping sound came from the front door. Just a few light knocks, almost hesitant. I peered through the peephole again. No one was there. The porch lay empty, as if the night itself was playing tricks on me. But I knew better. Whoever was out there was sending a message, a game of cat and mouse that had only just begun. My phone remained dead, the cold silence between me and James unbearable. I felt like a sitting target, vulnerable and alone, yet I refused to let panic consume me. Max pressed closer, his warm body a reassuring presence against the icy fear that gripped me. Then a sudden movement caught my eye, a flicker of light far off in the woods behind our cottage. A flashlight? Or something else? The tension in our little cottage had reached a breaking point, like a pressure cooker ready to blow. Every sound was amplified, the creak of the old wooden floorboards, the rustle of leaves against the window panes. Even the softest breath seemed too loud in the heavy silence. Max's usually playful eyes had sharpened into a fierce, watchful gaze, his body taut and ready for anything. He wasn't just my companion anymore. He had become a sentinel guarding the last bastion of our fragile peace. James and I sat side by side in the dimly lit living room, the faint glow of the security cameras casting eerie shadows on the walls. The threatening notes, the mysterious photographs, the chilling messages, they weren't mere scares. They were calculated moves in a game we hadn't even agreed to play. Our sanctuary had turned into a battlefield, and the enemy was relentless. The nights grew longer, darker, infused with an almost suffocating dread. I found myself holding my breath whenever the wind howled, every shadow morphing into a possible threat. Max's growls became the soundtrack of our evenings, his protective instincts heightened to a level I hadn't known a dog could reach. And James, though tired and stretched thin, never wavered. He fortified our home with locks, alarms, and cameras, each measure a small defiant stand against the encroaching darkness. But it wasn't just about physical safety anymore. The psychological weight was crushing. I'd catch myself staring out the window for hours, searching the darkened woods for any sign of movement, any hint of the unseen watcher. Sleep became a distant memory, replaced by a relentless vigilance that left me drained yet unable to rest. Then came the night when everything escalated beyond fear. The silence shattered as the front door rattled violently, slammed against its frame by a forceful blow. Max erupted into a frenzy of barks, his fierce growls echoing through the house like thunder. My heart pounded in my chest as I instinctively grabbed James's arm. The two of us frozen in a moment, suspended between terror and defiance. Someone was trying to break in. The seconds stretched into unbearable eternity. I could feel Max's tension radiating through his body, his eyes locked on the door as if daring the intruder to come any closer. James moved swiftly, securing the door with an extra bolt and pulling me close. The adrenaline surged, sharpening every sense, every nerve. In that moment I realized how fragile our world had become. The threat was no longer a distant shadow or an ominous note. It was real, immediate, and dangerous. But beneath the fear, a fierce resolve ignited within me. We wouldn't be victims. We were fighters, bound by love, by loyalty, and by a determination to protect what was ours. Max's eyes met mine, full of fierce loyalty and unspoken promise. I whispered, "We're in this together, no matter what comes." And as the night stretched on, heavy with tension and uncertainty, I knew our battle was far from over. The enemy lurked in the darkness, but so did our strength. The question burning in my mind wasn't just who was behind this, but how far they were willing to go, and whether we had the strength to face what was coming next. The night air hung thick with tension as I stood by the window, Max pressed close against my legs, his sharp eyes scanning the shadows beyond our small cottage. Every creak, every whisper of the wind seemed amplified, echoing the storm raging inside me. The fear, the uncertainty, it all coiled tight, threatening to unravel me. But beneath it all, a fierce determination blazed, refusing to be snuffed out. James had returned from his shift, exhaustion etched deep into his face, but his presence was a balm to my frayed nerves. He moved with quiet purpose, checking locks, glancing at the security cameras, doing everything he could to shield us from the invisible threat that had invaded our lives. Yet I could see the weight pressing down on him, the same heavy burden I felt crushing my chest. Then, as if the night itself held its breath, the doorbell rang sharply, slicing through the silence like a knife. My heart leapt. I glanced at James, who nodded grimly, and together we approached the door. Max growled low, a warning rumble that vibrated through the floorboards. I peered through the peephole. No one. Just darkness. But there, taped to the door, was an envelope. I tore it open with trembling hands. Inside was a single photograph, our cottage, taken from a disturbingly close distance. On the back, a message scrawled in jagged handwriting. "We know everything." A cold shiver ran down my spine. The walls that once sheltered us now felt like a cage, closing in with each passing moment. Who was watching? How much did they know? And most terrifying of all, what did they want? James pulled me into a tight embrace, whispering promises of protection and hope. Max licked my hand, his loyal eyes meeting mine with unwavering trust. In that moment I realized that despite the fear, despite the shadows looming ever closer, we were not alone. We had each other, and that was our greatest strength. But as I stood there, the photograph burning a hole in my palm, I knew this was not the end. It was the beginning of a darker chapter, one filled with secrets yet to be uncovered and dangers yet to be faced. And somewhere out there, hidden in the shadows, the answer waited, waiting for us to find the truth, no matter the cost. The question that haunted me as the night deepened was no longer if we could survive, but how far we were willing to go to protect the fragile light of our little family. Because some shadows refuse to be chased away. They only grow darker.